imminent challenges and ameliorating suggestions on the optimal implementation of the national computer policy.
Why don't you just proceed to page 3 on observations and findings, if you don't mind?
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, after much deliberations in the public hearing, the following observations and findings were made. Excuse me. Submissions by all the stakeholders admitted the existence of national computer policy since 2001. The stakeholders have commenced the adoption of the policy through the implementation of individualized institutional policies premised on their various core mandates. 2. The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999, as amended, places education on the concurrent legislative list, making it a shared responsibility of the federal, state, and local governments. Thus, while the policy and standards with regards to ICT in education are the responsibilities of the federal government, the implementation of same rests heavily and more at that on the state and local governments than the federal government. The consolidation of computer education at the basic education school levels, that Nigeria 6334 educational system, will provide the much needed feeder for computer education at tertiary level. 4. The Nigerian Educational Research and Development Council introduced computer education into the school curriculum since 2007. It is called Computer Studies, Information Technology, as compulsory subject at basic education level. Computer Studies as one of the optional subjects in the science and mathematical field of study, and data processing as one of the 34 trades and entrepreneurship subjects at senior secondary education level. Provisions in the curriculum underscore the need for teachers to acquire the relevant competencies and skills in the use of the ICT devices. NEDEC has also developed easy-to-use and self-study teachers' guides in computer studies, data processing, and online safety education to enrich teachers with skills on the use of computer and other ICT devices in facilitating teaching and learning with minimal guidance. There is serious dearth of ICT infrastructures and facilities in the public schools to support the implementation of the national computer policy and the school curriculum. It was also observed that Universal Basic Education Commission, UBEC, in execution of its mandates, using the national policy on ICT in education for the development and deployment of ICT in basic education in the country, has embarked on the provision of requisite ICT infrastructure and services, that's e-learning, equipment, and e-libraries, and networks in schools, data centers in the State Universal Basic Education Boards, that's SUBEB, and schools, and alternate power supplies such as solar panels, generators, and inverters, provision of UBEC's model school / smart classrooms projects, and ICT capacity building for teachers and educational administrators through national recognized certifications. These require wider coverage in all the states. Capacity and manpower development, commitment of government to steady power supply, and safe school environment for proper integration of the policy into the educational system. Again, it was observed that the policy is silent on teacher education and teachers' ICT provisional development. And teachers are indispensable for successful teaching and learning of ICT. Greater percentage of teachers in the public schools, that's primary and secondary, lack the basic computer knowledge, skills, and competencies required to effectively deploy ICT facilities where available in teaching and learning. Teaching and learning of computer studies applications in most public schools are based on theories and stories with no practical approach and meaningful impact on the learners, the nation, and the society at large. It was also observed that Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria, TRCN, in its bid to ascertain and license qualified professional teachers within its mandate, has kick-started and embarked on training of teachers on digital literacy across the country to keep them abreast with the national/global trends in ICT and to bring the knowledge to bear in their teaching and learning process. This, they require legislative and budgetary support to intensify for optimal impact. Pockets of crash or short-time computer trainings/workshops organized by various government and non-government agencies for teachers are insufficient and usually not well structured or planned, as they lack the basic rudiments of computer knowledge and skills and do not meet the objectives or targets of the policy within either the national or state framework. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the committee made the following recommendations. In order to successfully entrench computer education program in Nigeria, with its inherent numerous advantages and in line with the global trends, the committee recommends that Seanate do, 1, urge the federal government to engage the relevant stakeholders in education to review/revise the existing national computer policy and ensure it covers issues related to learning about ICT and learning through ICT. Quality professional development programs for pre-service and serving teachers. Integration of practical teaching and learning of ICT. Benchmark and standards for development. Production and use of e-content and resources, including learning applications and local context software in our schools and timeline. That's between the age of 5 to 10 years, within which the education system will fully integrate the ICT. It was recommended that Seanate urge the federal government to partner with the state government on the need for dogged implementation of the national computer policy in the education system, training and retraining of teachers on ICT, provision of computers and laptops for teachers, and provision of alternate power supply such as solar power and generators for schools. 3, urge the Federal Ministry of Education to include computer studies and application/ICT as one of the core courses for teachers training, and enforce the knowledge and application of computer studies as one of the prerequisites for qualifying as professional teachers within a particular time frame. Recommendation 4, urge the federal government to provide additional funds to UBEC, TRCN, NTI, and NEDEC to broaden their scope within their mandate of operation, respectively, in the construction of e-model schools and provision of smart classrooms in all the states, training and certifying of teachers on digital literacy, and establishment of national hub for the development of e-content and e-resources for teaching and learning ICT nationwide. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the conclusion. Though the national computer policy is in place, the impact cannot be significantly felt. The actualization of the national computer policy in education towards national development depends largely on the content of the policy and scope, quality of delivery of the policy, which again depends on the quality and disposition of teachers on ICT. It equally depends and requires the commitment of the federal, state, and local governments to provide the enabling environment such as adequate power supply, training/learning facilities, and incentives, funds, and security. These are lacking in the present policy, and appropriate time frame within which teachers in primary and secondary schools in Nigeria will be computer literate cannot be easily determined, except some of these lapses are addressed. The committee therefore invites the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to consider and approve the recommendations above. I so submit.
Senator Sabi, sitting as Chief Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. First, let me commend the committee for a very good job. However, I would like to observe that in the introduction, while stating that it was a motion, the sponsor of the motion was not mentioned. I think that should be considered as an oversight. We ought to have known who actually moved the motion. And I guess the presenter was actually the mover of the motion. So I thought this should have been captured because this is for records. Having said this, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, let me also say that in discussing this very important subject matter, the committee completely left out the role, the importance of the private sector. And I think within the context of computer education, the private sector has a very strong role to play because they are already playing that very strong role. As much as the emphasis was on teachers, but let it be known that the infrastructure for teachers to be trained is not something that government can provide alone. And I think we need to really look at those small computer training institutes or centers or whatever that are scattered all over And by bringing them onto such kind of government intention as proposed in their recommendation here, it will enable government to also widen the scope of employment by these centers. Because if you have a center that is captured to provide teachers training, because the teachers are all over, whether at state, local government, or even at the federal level where we have the federal, unity schools, for example, it will enable government to incentivize these training centers to increase the number of people they are training, that is from as far as the teachers are concerned. And beyond that also, we should remember these teachers go through formal education. How come they will graduate and do not have the requisite skill? I think that ought to also be captured properly, so that at the end of the day, let our graduates come out having these computer skills. Because in this 21st century, there is nothing that you can do to succeed when you leave out ICT skills in all its ramifications. So I support this particular presentation, and of course, when we come to look at the prayers, perhaps we may begin to think of how do we bring in the role of the private sectors, because like I said, they are all over this country and they are well positioned, if supported, to be able to fill in the gap that we have so clearly identified in this report. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Senator Professor Ajayi Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Boniface, representing Ondo North Senatorial District. Let me join my colleague. I was never invited to the meeting. On the same, let me congratulate the committee for preparing this very important report. Just as my colleague said, data, transmission of data, application of data is going to dominate the future. Whether you are talking of the economy, you are talking of transportation, you are talking of intelligence, this is very important. And that is why I believe that the computer education is very, very important. It's not too late that we are taking up now. But the inviting stakeholders, I thought we are not starting from ground zero as far as computer education is concerned. There are some schools that are already advanced. I was invited to a school about 2 years ago to chair an occasion where they were doing coding. I was shocked. The type of coding that primary school, secondary school were doing. I think we have something to build on. In the private school, yes. So I think those people, there's a need to share their experience in how they have achieved that huge success in computer learning, computer education. They develop apps, secondary school students. But again, just as my colleague pointed out, I see a gap here. The National Information Technology Agency has been established for over 10 years. And I think that agency is very, very critical in a project like this. It's an important stakeholder. And I believe that if we are going to succeed in implementing a policy on teacher education in computer, the National Information Technology Agency must be taken into account, taken into consideration, because they have a lot to offer. They have the expertise. In fact, they have been providing computer to secondary schools to encourage computer education in secondary schools. And I said, I believe that when we are considering the recommendation, I want to suggest that the National Information Technology Agency should be informed to make their contribution to this very important program. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Solomon Olamilekon Adiola.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very distinguished colleague, Adiola Solomon Olamilekon, representing Lagos West. Mr. President, let me join my colleague in commending the efforts of the Standing Committee of the Senate for a beautiful job. Mr. President, I will place more emphasis on the recommendation of the committee. And I want to say this, that there are a lot of intervention programs, agencies of the government that have been designated on providing ICT for the government. Number one among these agencies is the Nigeria or National Institute of Technology Development Agency, NITSDA. Information Technology Development Agency, NITSDA. Mr. President, billions of naira are deposited to these agencies every year. And the only assignment carried out by this agency is ICT. And the funding of this agency is directly from source. All corporate entities in this country at the end of every financial year, in their corporate account, set aside certain amount of money for ICT. And this money goes straight to the Central Bank of Nigeria for onward movement to NITSDA as an agency. And I believe it is time for the Committee on Education to engage this agency as well, to let them know what are their lines of duty. This 6 or 8 billion naira you receive, or 10 billion naira you receive every year, have you been able to partner with the educational sector to provide information on ICT centers in all of these schools and training and retraining? I think there is need for us to mandate the committee also to engage these particular agencies. And aside NITSDA, there are other agencies of the government that provide ICT centers. For instance, during the 8th Senate, I managed to provide about 35 public schools in my senatorial district with an ICT centers of minimum of about 50 computers into all the public schools. So it is time for us to have a coordinated effort to ensure that all these provision of ICT into our public schools must not be things we'll be discussing in the 20th century. In the 21st century, go to secondary school, sir.
I think you may wish to bring this as an additional prayer. Yeah.
Through what has been recommended by the committee, which borders believe that yes, more funds should be provided for them, but the one that was given to them, we don't know how judiciously they have applied them. And also, they have admitted that there is a policy in place to support ICT in all public schools, that policy should be strengthened, and the government should engage all the stakeholders so that together they can have at least one common front in addressing all these lapses we have in our schools as far as ICT is concerned. So, Mr. President, going forward, I want to implore that this recommendation that has been given to us by this committee, there should be a follow-up so that we ensure full implementation of this recommendation so that this effort put in place by this committee will not be an effort in futility. I so submit.
Thank you. Senator Stella Odua.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. Mr. President, I want to commend the mover of this motion and the committee for a job well done. Mr. President, it's a very sad thing that today we are discussing on how to train the teachers who are actually the frontliners on production, so to say, of our students who will later on become the leaders of tomorrow. I think it's very, very sad. But having said that, I want to commend them for having done a very good job. My concerns are these, Mr. President. Number one is the fact that we totally lack a strategy for computer literacy growth in Nigeria. Regardless of the quantum of money that will be allocated for this particular project, if we do not put in place a strategic growth plan, we will be unable to attain the result that we require. We're in a global village, and this global village has something trending. The trend is that you will be unemployable if you do not have computer skill, basic. You must be computer literate. In fact, they no longer put it on the documents when people are applying for job, because it's expected that you are supposed to have had that computer literacy before you apply for any job. And indeed, no school should exist without having the computer infrastructure and training. But it's not happening, and it cannot happen because we do not have strategy to address these gaps. Mr. President, I liked what Senator Solomon said, and indeed he's lucky because he's from city. I'm from village. My whole zone, the whole zone, Anambra North, and I believe some other zones, we do not have the basic infrastructure for the students. It's a luxury. The student doesn't even have access to television, talk less of computer. In fact, he doesn't have access to light. How would he have access to computer? And so tomorrow I give them 100 computers. Of what purpose? They cannot use it. We must address these gaps for what we are talking about, for the policy to be even implementable. And so you have teachers that are expected to give what they don't have. You can't get something out of nothing. They were not trained to be in computer. They lack the requisite literacy in computer. So what can they give? They cannot give. And so I think that what they have done is very, very good. It's a good step. But we need to be very thorough and develop it where we will have a strategy. There is absolutely no reason why every local government should not have a computer training center. Mr. President, if tomorrow the traders in Alaba market, the traders in Onitsha main market, by the way, that contribute 1.6 billion on a daily basis, if that trader is unable to embrace e-commerce, he will perish. If that trader fails to acquire the basic computer literacy, he no longer can exist. Are we not going to help them to acquire this basic survival skill? Because that's what it is. It's a survival skill ICT has become. Microsoft says that in the year 2025, they are going to employ about 20,000 people. If Nigeria can have access to just 2% of these 20,000, imagine how much we can repatriate back and the impact it will have on us. We no longer have an option. It's something we must do or we perish and we become illiterate. It's sad, really, really sad. And sad for my people because a trader today will no longer survive tomorrow if he or she fails to acquire the technical skill, which is just the basic ICT. So he can migrate from trading in the market to e-commerce. I think this is very, very important motion. We must treat it as a very crucial and indeed pivotal to our growth. Mr. President, I want to support this motion, and I believe that we need to do much more work to make it implementable, because we must make it work. I so submit, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Suraji Ajibola, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. I think it's good that the recommendations of the committee is coming, but I think generally it's symptomatic of the state of education in Nigeria. If, as at 2022, we are still having a situation whereby our education is still based on what happened before Nigeria's independence, is a sad commentary on our national history. But the problem, solvable as it were, could not be solved with making platitudes and making general statement and analogy. I've looked at the recommendations, and they are good in terms of providing general broad outlook of what needs to be done. But I think beyond those general statement of urging government, urging relevant agency, there's a need to come up with a critical assessment of the state of even computer knowledge among the teachers and in our schools today. Just as been said by Senator Odua, the issue is that in many places, some of the places they are even called schools are not even what to be called schools, not talk of having the requisite information, computer technology, and knowledge in that place. So there appear to be a need to engage even state authorities who happen to be the ones that are really in charge of basic education, to take the part of what has been done here. Because what the committee have done, good, of course, because we're a national legislature, is to look at it from the point of view of the national aspect of it. But the real job, the real activity that can actualize the objective of the assignment of the committee actually lie with our state authority. Now, on the question of even this information computer technology thing we talk, I think there appear to be a fact to say that the moment somebody buy computers and they can possibly play music or watch video on it, he said that the goal of information computer technology has been achieved, or that you can type a letter from the computer. I think that's far from it. The content of the education, the mode of instruction, and the mode of engagement of the students should be based on information computer technology. The world has gone so far that when we look at the amount of money government even use to buy printed books into billions of naira, this money could be abridged if there is adequate coverage of information computer technology, by which what should be buying from the publishers of those books is licenses to use electronic copies of those books. That will save a lot of money. But with that, what I would suggest is that going forward on the general recommendation that has been made is to have a clear timeline, to have a clear assessment. There could be a basis by which there could be a joint effort between the state government and federal government, possibly through the state ministry of education and federal ministry of education, to even have a critical assessment of the state of knowledge and training on ICT at our basic school all over the country. It is based on those data that we can now know the need assessment can be brought up. Then we have to have a clear roadmap with a timeline, and if there will be extra budgetary allocation to be able to do so. It's not just enough to come and say we have a policy on ICT, this are supposed to be done, agencies are supposed to be further empowered. If there are no clear timelines, no clear roadmap, they will not be able to achieve the goal of this important assignment that we must have, not only for us, but to ensure that the future generation of Nigerians are not in the backwater of history. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Let's proceed to recommendations. Recommendation 1. Urge the federal government to engage the relevant stakeholders in education to review/revise the existing national computer policy and ensure it covers issues related to learning about an ICT and learning through ICT, quality professional development programs for pre-service and serving teachers, integration of practical teaching and learning of ICT, benchmark and standards for development, production and use of e-content and resources, including learning applications and local content software in our schools, and timeline for 5 to 10 years within which the educational system will fully integrate the ICT. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 2. Urge the federal government to partner with the state governments on the need for dogged implementation of the national computer policy in the education system, training and retraining of teachers on ICT, provision of computers and laptops for teachers, and provision of alternate power supply, such as solar power and generators for schools. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye, and those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 3. Urge the Federal Ministry of Education to include computer studies and applications like ICT as one of the core courses for teachers in training, and enforce the knowledge and application of computer studies as one of the prerequisites for qualifying as professional teachers within a particular time frame. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye, and those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 4. Urge the federal government to provide additional funds to UBEC, TRCN, NTI, and NERDC to broaden their scope within their mandate of operation, respectively, in the construction of e-model schools and provision of smart classrooms in all the states, training and certifying of teachers and digital literacy, and establishment of national hub for the development of e-content and e-resources for teaching and learning ICT nationwide. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye, and those against say nay. The ayes have it. Leader of the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. The second order of the day is the presentation and consideration of the report of the Committee on Ethics, Privileges and Public Petitions in respect of a petition from Mariam Danna Mohammed against the Niger Delta Power Holding Company for alleged wrongful termination of her appointment. Mr. President, distinguished senators will recall that the report was laid on Thursday, 30th January 2020. Mr. President, you may wish to invite distinguished Senator Patrick Ayo Akinye-Lure to move the motion for the Senate to consider the report of the committee.
Senator Akinye-Lure Patrick Ayo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleagues, I remain Senator Ayo Akinye-Lure, representing Ondo Central. Mr. President, I rise that the Senate do consider the report of Committee on Ethics, Privileges and Public Petitions in respect of a petition from Mariam Danna Mohammed against Niger Delta Power Holding Company for alleged wrongful termination of our appointment. I so move for consideration, Mr. President. Thank you.
Senator Bamidele Okpayemi, please second.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'm Michael Okpayemi Bamidele, representing Ekiti Central. Mr. President, I rise to second the motion ably moved by Senator Akinye-Lure. I so second.
Thank you. Those in support that the Senate do consider the report of the ethics of the Committee on Ethics, Privileges and Public Petitions in respect of a petition from Mariam Danna Mohammed against the Niger Delta Power Holding for alleged wrongful termination of appointment. Those in favor say aye, and those against say nay. The ayes have it. Please present your report.
Thank you, Mr. President. most respected distinguished colleagues, hello chamber, hereby present the report of the Committee on Ethics, Privileges and Public Petitions in respect of a petition from Mariam Dana Mohammed against the Niger Delta Power Holdings Company, NDPAC, for alleged wrongful termination of our appointment. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the Senate will recall on Tuesday, 18th October 2019, that the chairman of this committee rose on Order 41 to present petition that came from the office of the President of the Senate of the Federal Republic, and drew the attention of the Senate to a petition from Mariam Dana Mohammed against the Niger Delta Power Holdings Company, NDPAC, for wrongful termination of our appointment, and urge the Senate to look into the matter.
You may wish to proceed to page 5. Observations and findings, please.
Mr. President, the committee sat, invited the petitioner and the respondents, and the following are our findings. Let's go to page 5. Observation and findings. After careful studying the submissions and oral presentation of Mariam Dana Mohammed and the Niger Delta Power Holdings, NDPAC, the committee noted as follows. 1. That Mariam Dana Mohammed was truly a staff of the defunct Power Holding Company of Nigeria, PACN, and was offered exclusive secondment to the Niger Delta Power Holding Company, NDPAC, to head the audit department as general manager with effect from 1st July 2011. And therefore remain a civil servant and not a political appointee. 2. That prior to our disengagement from service, there was no meeting presided over by the chairman of the board, the vice president Yemi Oshibala, or any other member of the board of NDPAC, where the decision to disengage her was taken. 3. That the disengagement of Mariam Dana Mohammed, along with the executive management team and the executive director of NDPAC, who were political appointees of Mr. President, was out of order because due process was not followed in accordance with the terms and conditions of her employment and disengagement of civil servants in the service of the nation, and by extension, the service of NDPAC, Niger Delta Power Holding Company. 4. That the officer was not accused of any offense or queried or suspended prior to her disengagement from service, which was by announcement to Nigerian Television Authority, NTA. 5. That the committee noted with the submission of the managing director of the NDPAC, that is Niger Delta Power Holding Company, that the non-communication of the resolution of the Senate to the government, to the management of the company, had been the reason for non-reinstatement of the petitioner, Mariam Dana Mohammed, back to service of the company up to now. Recommendations of the committee. Based on the findings above, Mr. President, the committee resolved to recommend to the Senate for approval as follows. 1. That the Senate hereby mandates Niger Delta Power Holding Company, NDPAC, to reinstate Mariam Dana Mohammed and pay all her entitlements because her disengagement did not follow due process in line with the laid down civil service procedure, rules and procedures. 2. That the Senate should immediately communicate its resolution to the Secretary to the Government of the Federation and Managing Director of Niger Delta Power Holding Company Limited, NDPAC, for compliance and implementation of same. Mr. President, my most distinguished respected colleagues, On behalf of the Senate Committee on Ethics, Privileges and Public Petitions, I hereby use this measure to appreciate the President of the Senate and the leadership of the United Senate for the opportunity given to us to serve in this capacity as the voice of the voiceless Nigeria. Mr. President, I so move for consideration by the House Chamber. Thank you.
Comments, please. Senator Gaya.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I'm Kabiru Gaya, represent the people of Kano South from Kano State. Mr. President, first of all, I would like to commend the chairman of this committee, Senator Ayo Akinye-Lure, for a job well done. I think he's the chairman for the masses and the chairman fighting for the cause of those people that were maltreated. I'm aware about this case for this lady. During the last Senate, there was a complaint on this matter. But luckily enough, the issue is now brought up, and I hope and pray that the Senate will take this matter seriously and bring back this lady to her job. As is aware, there was political appointees, but simply somebody don't like her in that place and included her name as a political appointee, and she was sacked while she's a staff of the organization. So Mr. President, I'll be very happy, and I'm sure most of Nigerians will be happy if this matter is brought back or brought in for a successful conclusion. I pray that this lady goes back to her job. I have known her, she's married to a Kano man, and I got the information a long time ago. We tried hard through the ministries, and there's even in the report that the presidency says she should be reinstated, but somebody don't want her back in that office. So I feel that this Senate should do justice and follow this matter up to the final conclusion. Thank you, sir.
Senator Jibril Barao.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am Barao Jibril, Kano North. Mr. President, I also want to commend the chairman and members of this very important committee for a job well done. The chairman, Senator Oliver, is Oliver everywhere. Whenever there's injustice, he makes sure, members of the committee, indeed, they make sure that justice is always brought to bear, as done in this case. This matter, the matter affecting this woman has been lingering for quite a long time. This woman or this lady had gone serious and is still going through serious and immense suffering. I know there was a time that this August Senate ordered that she should be reinstated in her job. But those that were to do it disregarded that resolution. We are not in the Banana Republic. We are not in the Banana Republic. We are in a country that is being ruled under rule of law. A very, very respected country within the Committee of Nations. Please, it's not good that some people that have been given the function to work for the people of this country do things that will embarrass the nation. This is an embarrassment to Nigeria. When the highest assembly in this country looked through a matter and found out that the citizen had been made to go through suffering for no reason, and decided that justice should be brought to bear in that case. Not someone that is outside or, somebody who is a foreigner. Even if that person is a foreigner, I mean, we should make sure that we become human. Being inhuman to cases that affect human beings, it's not good. This woman is a Nigerian for that matter. She's a Nigerian. So I think, Mr. President, we need to talk. We need to tell these people that, look, there is order, there is rule of law in this country, and this woman must be reinstated. Enough of this suffering. This woman has suffered enough for no reason. So I urge my colleagues to look at this issue and give their support so that we send a signal, a very good message out there to those who are refusing to stop the suffering that this woman is going through. I say something, Mr. President.
Thank you. I think we'll proceed to the recommendations. Recommendation 1, that the Senate hereby mandates the Niger Delta Power Holding Company to reinstate Miriam Denad Mohammed and pay all her entitlements because her disengagement did not follow due process in line with laid down civil service rules and procedures. Those in favor of this recommendation say aye, and those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 2. Before I proceed, Chairman of the committee, in light of this development that we've passed the first resolution, do you think there's need for a second one, considering that having passed this resolution, we must communicate this to the office of the SGF anyway? Is there a need for a specific and special need to put this up here?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. One of the major reasons when the Senate passed this particular resolution, the last paragraph when you look at item 5 on our findings, that the Senate noted from the submission of Mendy and of Niger Delta Power Holding Company that no communication of the resolution of the Senate to the manager of the company has been the reason for no reinstatement of the petitioner Mariam Dana Mohammed back to service of the company up to now. During the submission of the MD of the company, he said that they were expecting this company to also pass through the secretary to the government of the president for them to obey. Therefore, that is why we are adding number 2, Mr. President, that let us communicate the decision of the Senate of Federal Republic to the secretary for onward passport. And the clerk of nation will also communicate this thing, so you will not have any excuse to say that, this time around, he has not received communication because civil servants, they believe in their procedure that he has not received from his boss, who can sack him. So therefore, there is need for the whole Nigeria in the red chamber. The decision we take here is taken by the whole Nigeria. And therefore, let us also direct or urge the secretary government to communicate again, make it double communicate, Mr. President. They will have no fee to give essential action for resettlement of Dana Mariam Mohammed.
Thank you. May I that, please?
Thank you, Mr. President, in Abia South. As much as we would like to get things done, I do not think that it is our normal procedure to communicate directly with agencies of government and ministers and so forth. We have only one channel of communication to the government of the Federation of Nigeria. Once we do that, it is their responsibility to do so. Even if we communicate direct, the agency will still wait to get communication from the Federation because we have no, it's just like they themselves, if they write us, we will not take it. We will wait until we get communication from the President of the Federal Republic. With due respect, I think we should continue to follow our channel of communication. I so submit.
Thank you. Chairman, in light of this intervention, you want to put it to a vote or you want us to continue? You want to withdraw it? Do you want to withdraw it or you want to put it to a vote?
Well, Mr. President, I believe that recommendation number 2 is still necessary to block all loopholes.
Okay, we want the vote. Recommendation 2. Amendment, Senator Sabi.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. With respect to prayer 2, I think the window, if we really want to listening to what Minority Leader said, is that the committee, as it were, have mandates to communicate with respect to some of their mandates and functions. So rather than the Senate, maybe do we consider giving them the leave to proceed? Because within this context, otherwise,
no more the committee. It's a Senate
yes, I understand, but of course, the Senate committee is still the Senate.
If they have made their presentation.
Because otherwise, that is the only window I see. Otherwise, definitely the point being made is
I put the vote. Leader of the Senate?
To make some clarification, Mr. President, you know, the committee is a committee of this distinguished Senate, and whatever resolution, whatever thing we take, is no more the committee's responsibility again. It becomes part of the Senate. It's the Senate now that is acting. The committee has concluded its work. So whatever we do now, the Senate as a whole, as an institution that is taking a decision. So there is no need for us to refer to the committee again by the time a decision of this distinguished chamber is taken. I just want to make that clarification. Okay.
We put the vote. Recommendation 2, that the Senate should immediately communicate the resolution to the Secretary to State Government of the Federation, to Secretary to Government of the Federation, and the Managing Director of the Niger Delta Power Holding Company for compliance and implementation of same. Those
My amendment, Mr. President, is that the Senate should immediately communicate its resolution to the Secretary of Government of the Federation to direct the Managing Director of the Niger Delta Power Holding Company to comply with its resolution on this matter. What is directed on this matter?
Seconder. Seconder.
Mr. President, I second the amendment on prayer 2 by the Senate leader. I so second.
What is the amendment?
Mr. President, the amendment is that the Senate should immediately communicate its resolution to the Secretary to the Government of the Federation so that she direct Managing Director of the Niger Delta Power Holders for compliance and implementation of the same. I so second.
Those in favor of prayer 2 as amended say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, the third order of the day is a motion standing in the name of distinguished Senator Stella Adaeze Odua and 5 others on the need to establish a visionary budget-driven national planning framework for Nigeria. Mr. President, you may wish to invite distinguished Senator Stella Adaeze Odua to move this motion.
Senator Stella Adaeze Odua, please move your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, my name is Stella Adaeze Odua. I represent Anambra North. Mr. President, with your kind approval, I would like to comment.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, dear colleagues, this bill is co-sponsored by 5 other distinguished senators. This motion is co-sponsored by 5 distinguished senators. The Senate aware that in the last 20 years, Nigeria has developed several national plans with a focus on strategically improving the socio-economic status of the country and the lives of every Nigerian. These plans and strategy include the Transformation Agenda, National and State Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy, Needs 1 and 2, and 6, and Nigerian Vision 2020. Aware that these national plans were aimed at socio-economic development with a focus on wealth creation, empowerment generation, poverty reduction, and value orientation, and the long-term Vision 2020 statement was that by 2020, Nigeria will be one of the largest economies in the world, able to consolidate its leadership role in Africa and establish itself as a significant player in global economic and political arena. We wish to note that in certain aspects, Nigeria has improved in its global position. Nigeria ranked 27th in nominal gross domestic product, GDP, in 2020 from 20th in ASEAN and improved on it to be 15th place in the global ease of doing business, ranking from 146 in 2018 to 131 in 2020. However, Mr. President, we are in the first quarter of 2020 and we are yet to see the evidence that Nigeria's development plan have fallen short of achieving the vision of becoming one of the top 20 largest economies in the world. We are therefore concerned that despite the incremental growth in the nation's nominal GDP and gross national income over the years, the average Nigerian has experienced little or no change to their social economic status. Some have even experienced a retrogressive impact in their lives in the recent years. Nigeria has been dubbed and called several names, all are negative. However, with the 47.7% of the population and a figure of 94,734 million as at November 2020, 1/3 of the nation's children are never enrolled in school. And so Nigeria currently has the highest rate of HIV and AIDS-related deaths in the world. We are convinced that there is an urgent need to identify and eliminate the obstacles that have posed a problem to successful conceptualization and implementation of previous national development plan in Nigeria ahead of the next generation of national plans. We observe that international practice in countries that have demonstrated significant success in implementing their national development plan, such as Ghana, Rwanda, but to name a few, formulated collaborative and evidence-based plans with clearly identified objective and targets area at the conceptualization stage. We observe also that under Ghana's shared growth and development agenda, for example, the National Development Planning Commission, NDPC, is legally mandated to provide legislative instruments and prescribe the procedure and timelines to regulate the development planning process at all levels of government. In Rwanda, for example, the Ministry of Finance and Planning were merged to form the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning in 1997 in order to improve the coordination between the function of finance and planning and to foster greater evidence-based national planning and performance-based budgeting, which is what this is all about. We further observe that even in a more developed economy, we have national planning that tends to be more sector-related, such as in Norway, in New Zealand, and indeed the US. There is a clear recognition of importance of budget and national planning coordination by Ministry of Finance and and different departments, different MDAs. They come together to collaborate at the Parliament or at the Cabinet, whichever is obtainable in their various countries. They play a vital role in institutionalizing such plans and in implementation process. We are therefore disturbed, Mr. President, dear colleague, that despite Nigerians' articulated national plan over the years, it continued to adopt annual national budget that really does not reflect a buy-in from relevant stakeholder and MDAs towards implementation and achieving the developmental goals that will be set out in the National Development Strategy and plans. And so we are further disturbed that the approval of the budget submission by MDAs to National Assembly is not reflective of goal-oriented and performance-based allocation. For example, under the Appropriation Act of 2018, the total budget to the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, a very vital ministry in national development, was 554 billion. This figure dropped by almost half of it, coming to 331 billion in 2020 budget. However, the 2020 budget proposed budget of sustaining growth and job creation, including the project expenditure. And this increased the combined allocation to the Ministry of Power and Ministry of Works and Housing to 420 billion. This roller coaster allocation is a cause for concern for us, and it calls into question the existing benchmark for success, criteria for resource allocation, and the accountability of MDAs to efficiently utilize the allocated resources to achieve the goals within their jurisdiction and minimize wasted resources. Mr. President, dear colleague, we understand that Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, as well as other relevant MDA, need to adopt a national planning and budget framework that promotes a buy-in from the relevant stakeholders at the conception stage. This is to harmonize the vision of the budget. This collaborative and coordinated planning will ensure a national vision that enables MDAs to identify relevant programs and projects to be implemented within the budget framework period. While this is happening, the budget will be informative, and so budget hearings and defense process during this preparation of annual budget will be very educative and then informative as well. Mr. President, we recognize that without a visionary budget-driven national development plan, the growth strategy and respective MDAs will continue to fall short of achieving their goals, and projects will have little or no purpose. There will continue to be a high propensity of wasteful resource allocation and overlapping of projects. Therefore, addressing these issues, Mr. President, is very pivotal for us to be purpose-driven in our budget implementation. And so these issues must be at the heart of the next generation of mid-term and long-term national development plan. For example, Nigerian 2050 and subsequent budgeting cycle in Nigeria. Mr. President, the summary of this motion really is very clear. The summary is that it's important that our budget speaks a message, that our budget is visionary, that our budget can be transparent, but most importantly, our budget can be assessed at the end of each cycle. And so if our target, if our vision is to lift Nigeria from poverty stage 1 to stage 2, then that particular budget will address that vision. And so it's going to be a vision-driven, a purpose-driven budget. And that is what is attainable globally. It's a global best practice to have a budget-driven, a purpose-driven budget that will ensure that at the end of the day, we can assess and dissect the accomplishment of the budget. Mr. President, dear colleagues, I wish to solicit that this vision-driven budget is supported. And so these are the prayers, Mr. President. Number 1 prayer. Accordingly, we resolve that number 1 prayer should be, Mr. President, mandate the Senate Committee on Appropriation, National Planning and Finance to conduct a thorough review of Nigerian budgeting practice as well as national planning process with a view to creating a more synergized and collaborative system that is both effective and efficient. Number 2, to invite the Honorable Minister of Budgets and Finance and National Planning and Vice Chairman of National Planning Commission to address the Senate on the failure and shortcoming of previous national development plans and to present a detailed report appraising the current budget and national planning process, and within 4 weeks from the Senate appearance, recommend to the Senate relevant legislative and bureaucratic steps that could be adopted to foster a more efficient, effective, and synergized budget and planning and national planning system. Number 3, identify any extant legislative and/or regulation that are archaic, contrary to international best practice, and will stand as an impediment to a more effective and efficient budgetary and national planning framework, and take the necessary steps to effect amendment and to repeal such legislation or regulation if they do exist. The last one, number 4, is to carry out any other necessary legislative steps that will give effect to the realization of the spirit and intent of this motion. Mr. President, dear colleagues, I here submit. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Odua. Before I invite a seconder and comments, let me state up front that this is clearly a very, very serious motion and clearly a product of good intellect and research. But be that as it may, I want to plead that we still have a lot of items on the other paper. So I want to plead with our colleagues to be very, very brief in their presentations so we can move on to other issues. Senator Sabi.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. First, let me second this motion as ably moved by distinguished Senator Stella, and to say that, Mr. President, with due respect, you've captured it. The importance of this particular motion cannot be overstated. However, I want to say that the issues are very clear, and what has been lacking is the lack of a clear legislative intervention. And so it would be very nice if at the end of the day we are able to agree on what legislative intervention we should make. I recall in the 8th Senate, this issue came up. There were about 1, 2, 3 or so bills dealing with issues having to do with, the issue of planning. And the key issue here in most instances is that politicians, those of us in this chamber, with due respect, we are the number one culprit. We are the ones who are not disciplined enough to allow what has been packaged as a vision to see the light of the day. And I think, I will also recall, thank God, my permanent secretary in those days is here. What we normally say when we meet in discussing some of these issues, one word comes out: lack of political will. It's always what those of them in the civil servants will tell you: lack of political will to see certain things. So I think if we can put the political will to solve this problem, then that issue will be resolved. Otherwise, we discuss this same issue in the 8th Senate, we are here discussing it, it will be discussed in the 10th Senate, it will be discussed in the 11th and in the 12th. So if we take that political will to discuss this subject matter, because it's serious enough, Mr. President, and this is the reason why we have so much abandoned projects. The quantum of abandoned projects in Nigeria runs into trillions. If you go around and see some buildings where billions have been sunk into, and today if you ask what is happening there, nothing is happening there. So it's the issue of political will. And I think it is high time we allow that political will to prevail in this country. Throughout my service here, I was involved in planning, and I knew efforts that were made to see how planning can be brought into our scheme of things. And I think Nigeria had the 3rd National Development Plan in the 80s, and that was about the last consolidated, integrated, visionary plan we've ever had as a country. Every other one was designed to serve political interest and political purpose. All the ones you've mentioned here. And I'm happy the mover of the motion was a player at the other side in the executive, and she understands that yes, it is the lack of political will that has denied us the capacity to bring to bear very good intentions for the citizens. So whatever we are going to say in this motion, the moment we do not resolve to agree beyond all the 4 motions, or is it prayers, we must agree on what bill do we need to put forward so that the entire Senate, we take that bill, ensure that we do the needful, and at least resolve that age-long constraints of lack of political will. And I would also want to add, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, that if you look at the past efforts, what normally happens is when you have a plan, out of that plan you pick whatever you want to achieve for the first year. And then subsequent years, where you stopped in the first year, you carry forward to the second year, you continue, and so on until you are able to roll out, if you are using the rolling plan, for example. But this is not the case. And like I said, it is simply because those of us in this chamber, we know these projects are normally truncated, and alongside that also, I think the Nigerian citizens will also have to really take this matter very seriously.
Please round up.
Yes, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, you see, when you bring a subject matter as important as this, we shouldn't rush it.
Chief Whip, I already made the appeal. I recognize the importance of this motion. It's a very, very critical one. Then we also have a lot of our colleagues who have indicated interest to speak. And we must manage that time so we can conclude the other items on the other paper. Round up, please.
So thank you very much. My final shot at this is I support and second this motion. But like I said, let's do the needful by tackling this constraint that has remained a constant decimal, the lack of political will. Let this Senate give the required teeth to the political will. When we look at the prayers where we talk about the law or whatever that law is, we must give it very, very, very good attention so that that law can see the light of the day, so that next assembly we do not have to have anybody having any cause to bring this kind of motion. I so second, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Aishaitu Ahmed Dayewu.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. Seanate Ahmed Binani, representing Adamawa Central. Mr. President, this is a very, very important motion that dwells on each and every one of us, because the need for a visionary, budget-driven national planning, to me, is not only desirable, but is a necessity if only and only Nigerians, that is this country, is ever serious to tackle the myriad of challenges that has been confronting us frontally and threatening the very fabric of our national existence. This motion is one aspect. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, all the challenges enumerated in this motion, which I don't have to repeat, as you said, because of time constraint, do not only breed absolute poverty, but to me, is securely responsible for the insecurity which is facing each and every one of us here today, and indeed the whole nation. It is a known fact that unemployment and absolute poverty breed youth and citizenry that can turn overnight into criminals, because to them, life has become meaningless, life has become nasty, short, and brutish. And Mr. President, all this can be attributed to the failure to strictly adhere to the National Development Plan, upon which our annual national budget premised on. This is just the crack of this motion. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the high turnover of heads of ministries, that is ministers, as far as I'm concerned, can be largely responsible for this, because each minister comes in with his or her own plans and policies, which results sometimes into somersault of policies, and to some extent, maybe total reversal of plan. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, as a legislature, we have the constitutional responsibility to monitor all this project implementation on the basis of the provisions of the National Development Planning. And Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, because of the time which you have mentioned, this motion wouldn't have come at a more right time than this, that we are just 1 year into the 9th Senate and the beginning of 2020 budget. So while I agree with the last speaker, that is political will, but I also want the last speaker to know that the legislature are not responsible for budget implementation. They are only responsible for oversight, monitoring purposes, for performances. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this MDS come to us with their envelope. They tell us this is their envelope. And not only envelope, they come to us with a tailored envelope, that this is my envelope, and from the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, I'm asked to tailor it to this which we cannot say no. You know it, everybody knows it here. So the legislature can only oversight what is being approved. Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues.
Thank you very much. Senator Basi Akpan.
Thank you, Mr. President. My distinguished and most respected colleagues, Senator Albert Basi Akpan, Akwa Northeast. Mr. President, I rise to support this motion and to equally add my voice in thanking the mover of the motion. And Mr. President, I feel that in developed economies all over the world, most often than not, you have 50 years rolling plans. And these plans are backed up by law. So whichever party, no matter the ideology that comes in, must adhere to the development plan, because these are planning that has taken into cognizance population growth and all that, and ever improving economy in those respective economies. The president is quite pathetic that the real essence why Fiscal Responsibility Act was established and enacted by the National Assembly was equally to add to support government's development planning process. And you see year in, year out, the budget that comes in with a medium-term expenditure framework. Go and look at those medium-term expenditure framework. Are they connected 2020 to what are the linkages? Because it is the medium-term framework that should support the vision. We used to have Vision 2020. Thank God that 2020 is come and gone. Maybe we'll start looking at another vision of maybe 2040. But be that as it may, year in, year out, if you look at agriculture in Nigeria, they have what they call National Agricultural Summit, which brings states and federal government together. So also in education and other vibrant sectors. These were meant to actually integrate and then enable the subnational government, like the states and local government, have a buy-in into the national planning process. But what is the relationship between the states and the federal government in planning? There is no connection. So we'll come in here year in, year out, and we'll still find ourselves in this process. I'll give you an instance. Let me just cite one example, Mr. President. The president, in his wisdom, took away the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway and handed it over to the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And in my interaction with the MD of Sovereign Wealth Fund, that road will be completed by next year. Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. And if you also look at the second Niger Bridge, the presidency took it, handed over the Sovereign Wealth Funds to fund. That bridge will be completed next year. And those roads will be, the bridge and the Lagos-Ibadan will be towed. But if you have allowed it under the confines of our national budget, in 2025 years, we'll be talking about Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. So I think we need to have a different approach to these issues. It's not about the will. Even if you have the will and you don't have the resources, what happens? So I think something must happen. Government has no reason in providing infrastructure. All over the world, roads all over the world are told. So even if you look at how much we can free the budgetary provision for road on a yearly basis, you could go into other areas. And how much can government even achieve at our time, considering the state of our infrastructure in the country? So I believe that it's not just about the will. We must be very strategic, and we must ensure, because they say whatever gets measured gets done. We must ensure that whatever we do it holistically, and we follow it to the letter and see how effective it will end up. So I support this motion, and I urge all my colleagues to do.
Thank you, Senator Albert. Let's have the chairman on Committee on Appropriations, Senator Jibril Baram.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am Senator Baroji Ibrahim Kano North. Let me commend my deputy for initiating this motion, even though I'm one of the co-sponsors. She initiated it, and she courted us into, this motion. I need to commend her for having the foresight to bring forward this important motion. Mr. President, It is a problem for this country, and it is always said, year in, year out, that we have brilliant minds, brilliant brains, seasoned Democrats. Technocrats and civil servants who always put together our national development plans. But the problem, the major problem, is actualizing these development plans. And sometimes, in fact, there are several reasons. And if we really want to discuss and interrogate the reason why this is happening, we take a long period of time. And it's even good that the motion is proposing that there should be a joint committee at the end of the debate, so that we can look at deeply at the reasons why we are not being able to meet our national development targets. Well, on the surface, there are several reasons. Sometimes the reason can be ascribed to the citizens, to the masses themselves. You have a new government. Maybe the government is being led by a patriotic leader and decides that, okay, I'm going to continue with the projects I inherited from my predecessor. And then he goes on that trajectory. Then the masses themselves say, this man has not done anything. Even the project he's doing was initiated by a predecessor. So we don't know what he has done. So sometimes the fear for hearing something like the leaders will always like to bring in their projects, bring new projects whenever they find themselves at the hem of affairs, either at the state level or at the national level. Apart from that, there's issue of corruption. You say, okay, if I initiate this project, what is going to come to me? I mean, there will be some, something. There will be some something that will come. But if I decide to continue with what I inherited from my predecessor, I will not be able to have that, because that had been given to my predecessor. So it's another factor. And again, like adduced by Senator Akpan, there's an issue of funding, problem of funding. So there are a lot of problems why we are not being able, to the plan. So it's something that we need to have deep discussion over, to interrogate these reasons and find a lasting solution to this problem. And when we're able to do that, then we can bring some kind of legislation to make sure that we don't deviate from a national development plan. But if we leave it open this way, leave it open the way it is now, certainly we'll continue to face this problem and we'll continue to talk about it year in, year out, as it has been the case. So I commend her, and at the end of the day, we have a resolution that will allow us to sit down to look at it deeply. As a subject.
Thank you. Senator Gershom Bassey, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gershom Bassey, Cross River South. Mr. President, let me first of all congratulate the mover of this motion for a very thorough and well thought out, well-researched motion. I think the motion itself captures all the issues. But what I particularly like about this motion is that the prayers go forward to address some of the points that have been raised, particularly by the Chief Whip. The issue of why budgets and budgeting has not been successful in the past. We all know about long-term planning, and we all know that there should be linkages between budgeting and economic growth or socio-economic growth. We understand that. But why have we not been able to achieve that in Nigeria? That is the real question. And I think that was what the Chief Whip was touching on. And I think this motion goes to the heart of that problem, especially in the prayers. And so I think it is the work of this Senate to investigate and come up with solutions to making sure that we continue to link planning, particularly long-term planning, to medium-term planning, to budgeting, which eventually ends up in economic growth, social economic growth. And that's what we need. And that is what grows our economy. That cycle of growth, that is what creates. And the motion has said it. This is the best practice in all the developing countries, even in the developed world. The linkages between these areas is what is the catalyst for growth in all these countries. She's talked about, the newly, the NICs, you name them. They all have a priority for planning. And so I want to move to support the mover of this motion and lend my support to this motion in particular, and urge everybody in this chamber to support this motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I will take the Chairman of Finance, and thereafter I will take Senator Ibukule Amoso.
Thank you, Mr. President. Adeola Solomon Olamileko, representing Lagos West Senatorial District. Mr. President, let me join other colleagues to commend the prime mover of this motion and other co-sponsors for a well-detailed motion, at least for drawing our consciousness to one major issue that we need to work on seriously as a country that is serious about doing everything to develop itself. Mr. President, I quite agree with the body of the motion and also the prayers this motion has sought for. But from the contribution we have listened to, yes, we all agree any country that fails to plan is bound to fail. And I believe in the wisdom of the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari. That is why he has decided to have a full-fledged ministry called the Office of National Planning, headed by a Minister of State. That shows the seriousness that this present administration attach to planning as far as it is concerned. And this planning we refer to also goes along in pari passu with the budgeting. Yes, the challenges are there. We are planning. If you go into the record, planning in different stages. There are 10 years plan, there are 15 years, there are 20 years, there are 5 years. With detailed information about how we intend to arrive and achieve this plan we have set for ourselves. And one thing that I've continuously tried to hinder this plan put together and set or put forward is funding. You quite agree with me. There's a bit of a challenge. I quite agree with the prayer of the motion, with the body of the motion regarding implementation of our budget. It's a major issue. And in line with what he has said, performance to be in line with the line by line as passed by the National Assembly. But the question here is this. The resources available to us, even to implement the budget, is not there. Just this morning, front page of the Nation newspaper, the SS crude oil account dropped from $325 billion to $70 million just in a month. And these are reserves that we can fall back on to take care of one or two things. That shows there are a lot of funding challenges. So that from the prayer, we sought to ask a committee to let us sit down and look at why have we failed previously in all the plans that have been put together. I quite agree with her. To also mandate the committee on appropriation to look into how best way we can come out of this doldrum and make a good plan that will work for all of us. in conjunction with the Ministry of National Planning. I quite agree with that. But also, we should look inward and look into how do we even harness these resources that is available before us. How do we block all the leakages? How do we try to show up our revenues? Over-reliance and depending on one source of revenue has not helped us as a nation. There is need for us to start breaking new grounds and looking for other alternative ways of funding all these plans and even our budget, so that whatever plans we put together, as far as this country is concerned, can work and we can adhere to it strictly. So, Mr. President, I once more commend the mover of this motion and also order my colleague to please support this motion so that together we can start looking into the future as far as our country, Nigeria, is concerned. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Ibugo Amosun, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ibukunle Amosun, I represent Ogun Central. Mr. President, let me join my colleagues in commending the efforts of the main sponsor, Senator Stella Odua, and the other co-sponsors. Mr. President, you mentioned that this motion is very important. I really, truly agree with you and with my colleagues that have spoken in that same tone and line. But Mr. President, I have my worries. Beautiful motion, very beautiful indeed. But our problem is not that we are bereft of ideas. We've always witnessed these wonderful ideas, wonderful everything, well-researched motion. Time where in this Nigeria, 1999, when President Obasanjo came, within maybe 2 years, we had this, our plan, national plan. After, when he left, again, we have this Vision 2020. Lo and behold, 2020 came to meet us. And what has happened? You remember when there's this acronym, they got about, I think, 5 nations, Russia, like that. We missed on that. Now it was Sprint. We missed on that as well. All those, when we were in school, when I was doing my international finance, we are calling development, these are, you call emerging markets, emerging countries. All of those left us behind. Now we are still underdeveloped. We are still developing now. Those countries that we were together at that time, of course they are developed now. Either by way of technology, look at any indices that you want to, all financial litmus tests, they've passed. Yet we are still where we are. So we need the political will, really, Mr. President. It will not matter about however beautiful, however this that we've done. And I'm happy that she too, I've had the opportunity of tasting both worlds. He was in the executive side before coming here. She knows what I'm saying. Look at our budget. I can give you about maybe just 2 or 3 examples so that you will know that Mr. President will come, just like what happens in states. You have this plan ready. The plan is not followed through. So when it's not followed through, what happens? Somebody talked there about Second Niger Bridge. We talked about Lagos Ibadan, which was given to, I think, what's the name of his company? In 2006, signed before President Obasanjo left. What happened? Look at the railways. They started 2007. Another president came. The thing was stopped. 2 administrations after that stopped. Now, look at what is happening in the rail system. So it will take the political will. Even our budgets, when we come, they just bring the budget, MTF, you cannot change the envelope, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. I'm not even worried about that because they are forcing us, because they felt that there's corruption here, there's this there. They are forcing us, our budget to be streamlined, and they are forcing us to be very responsible. No problem with that. But as a legislator, what I think we can do is to force all this executive arm to ensure that they follow through all this our plan. However grandiose our plan may be, once it is not followed through, Mr. Ecom does this to this level. I remember in 2005,
we went to Port Harcourt, from Port Harcourt to Bonny, and they said they are starting the bridge. I think the bridge is just started now. It was planned for. Nobody went back there. So when we have issues like this, it will continue to be like that, and we will not develop. We have national plan. I mean, Shamsuddin Usman was there sometime. Later, I think Aganga was there. All of them planning. Beautiful words. But what has happened? Because we do not have the political will to follow it through. So what we can do as a legislator is to ensure that when we are oversighting, we will look into those areas that, oh, this is critical for development. Maybe our infrastructures, this and that. And we will now forcefully advise them that in your coming next year budget, this is where this is. It must be followed through. Because without doing that, look at Ibadan.
Please round up, sir.
2004, they've awarded that road. It's still there. This is 2020. Nothing has been done. Not even 10% of it has been done. So, Mr. President, I think what we need to do here is to strengthen the National Assembly on this our oversight, and to ensure we will write a report for them that this is what we found in this year. In your next year budget, follow this thing through. Unless we do that, Mr. President, we'll be running in circle. Thank you, and thank the mover of this motion.
Thank you very much. I will call on Senator Rohidi, but please, before I do that, one more time, please be very, very brief. And after Senator Rohidi, we take Senator Fada Hussein. Also, please, I need to be very, very brief.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm Senator Matthew Rogide, I represent the South Central District. I assure Mr. President I will take less than 1 minute. Mr. President, first let me lend my voice, in praising Senator Salaudua and the other co-sponsors of this motion. I wish we had a full Senate to discuss this issue, because we are just about 15 or 16 of us left here, Mr. President. If there is any reason for us to come again, particularly after considering the prayers, we have to bring this motion again for our members to have thorough evaluation of this motion. We would have succeeded really in representing our people properly. Mr. President, let me...
Are you suggesting that the motion will withdraw?
And of course, reaching this decision. Mr. President, let me say that this motion very well, researched. And if I was to lend voice to it, I was fortunate to be at a conference of PAC some time ago in the Republic of Benin. And of course, the organizers of that conference from outside this country mentioned very clearly why they were taking certain investments to Rwanda. And look at us, a huge nation. Rwanda that just came out of, the civil war. And the destination in Africa today is Rwanda. It is because they have a purpose. They have their budget tied to national planning. In fact, what this thing is saying, simplicity, is we are not tying our national planning to our budgets. If you recall very many years, I've stood up here to say that our budgeting here is an annual ritual. If you look at the wastages in our budget, Mr. President, every year, for inconsequential and invisible line items, put all the amounts together, you will find out that it's as though we don't even know what to do with the money. When so many things are crying for attention. Mr. President, I want to get us reminded, and again to add to the issues that she has raised. Nigeria, to tell you that we are directionless when it comes to planning, national planning and budget. Nigeria is signatory to so very many international treaties and conventions in area of health. When we say universal health coverage, 15% of our annual budget should go to health. We are not honoring it. Even the act of the National Assembly over our own health act, we are not honoring it. So in which case, the planning that we have nationally in the direction of health, we are not respecting them. Look at education. What we should devote to education every year. If it is part of our planning, why are we not putting the money there? Whereas, that is why she said, what went to the Ministry of Works and Housing, 2 budgets echoes ago, is a whole lot
different from what came in the subsequent year, and then of course what came up in 2020. So, Mr. President, I want to say that the solution to all of this, yes, we have suggested there is nowhere in the world where money is placed alongside with development that there is no planning. The problem is posited here. Let us go back to the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007, an act of the National Assembly. That act, if you read it from the beginning, it tells you what planning is through MTF. It tells you FSP, the fiscal strategy paper. It tells you what to do. And then when budget comes, what we should do along the line of planning. After budget is passed, Mr. President, that same act says the Minister of Finance has to draw up a timetable. And this National Assembly, using the two committees in the Senate Committee on Finance and the House Committee of Finance, every quarter they are supposed to monitor the progress in our budget. Mr. President, since I came to this Senate in 2015, I remember seeing that happen. So you can see that the whole thing is just directionless. So this motion coming now, if we now want to address issues, to put our money where our interest is, and I want to humbly, disagree with some of our colleagues. It is not how much you have that can decide the development that you can elicit. You sew your coat according to your cloth. If we have 1,000 naira in this country, let's do that 1,000 naira purposely in a direction. The issue of power, we'll be talking about it in this country. You can never have enough money that can give us power today that is uninterrupted. The issue of roads, we can never have enough money to build our roads, all right, that we say, yes, we have solved that problem. But the little we have, how are we applying it? Is it along there with our national plan? No. So everything that we are doing, all the governments, that's why this issue of whether it is party A or party B, I think is an excuse for people to escape. But the truth of the matter is, this is the time to start. If we want to start from 2021, our budget must be driven by our own plans. And those plans, we have to agree at the in the National Assembly. Thank you very much.
No, Senator Fadasis.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name remains Senator Adefadansi from Osun State. I agree with Senator Stella Odua for the brilliant output here on budgetary preparation in Nigeria generally. That is the general overhead. A budget of
Is your mic on?
A budget of a nation reflects the mission and vision of a leader or of a government. My question now is that what is the mission and the vision of our leader? What is the mission and the vision of our government? From there, the mission on Greek, the vision on education, the vision on this and that, we should know that is what we have to put together. And when we are larger than this, you see a lot of contributions. But now, maybe I will plead that maybe very soon this motion can be brought back and all of us will be able to contribute so that we know that we will not continue to roll in problems upon problems every year. The same pattern of budgetary allocation, the budgetary preparation that we witnessed when we were in the civil service is still the same thing they are rolling over today. No, there's no modernized way of budgeting to affect the rural population. The same rural population we have already left, they are becoming rural and the poverty has already become the order of the day there. The budget, the mission should be how to lift the rural population out of the poverty. Now we are already 5 years in the government of this nation. How many rural population has been affected? What we are having there is insecurity here and there. What is the mission? What are we going to budget for in the next 3 years? That is my own contribution. When we have specific missions and vision of the leaders, then we now know where to go. For now, everything is on security. By the time we finish Zamfara security, we move to Boko Haram. Boko Haram refused to go. Then we move to Osun mining. We continue to roll in from one problem to another. Let us be specific on our budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will take Senator Gubiru, and after that I will take Senator Ishaku. So Gubiru, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Distinguished colleagues, my name is Brian Gober, representing Sokoto East. Well, I remember Ms. Stella Adua. In November, we had a seminar on national planning. And in fact, during that seminar, we had the Minister of Finance and Budget and Planning. We also had the Chairman of the National Planning Commission. We also had members of this National Planning Committee of the Senate. We also had the Chairman himself of the National Planning Committee. We discussed thoroughly about this issue, and the stakeholders were there. Even the the Budget Department was also there. We actually realized the need to look at this issue thoroughly and came up with something. Because it was during that time the National Planning Committee Chairman of the nation was saying he had a program on which one comes first, egg or the chicken. Is it the budgeting or the planning? And he is of the opinion that planning should come first, then after the planning, then we do the budgeting and so on. Then, at the end of that meeting, there was a communique, and in that communique, it was said that the planning should be started at the grassroots, and then also the National Assembly should be involved in that planning. But the question is, how far will that go? That is something that we are not aware of. But we believe that was discussed. Then there is also this issue of funding that many people were talking about. You see, even if you have 1 kobo, please plan to do something with that 1 kobo so that you can succeed. But it's not an issue that, yes, we don't have money, we don't have this, therefore we cannot plan. Even if you have 2 kobo, you have to plan. You see, if you look at this country today, we have about over 12,000 abandoned projects because we just go ahead and do something without planning. You budget for something else, and then at the end of the day, you leave it as abandoned project. So I think it's a very good motion. We go ahead and look at it, and then the committees will do the right thing they are supposed to do. Then at the end of it, I believe everybody is going to benefit from this. But certainly the National Planning Committee of this Assembly has taken care of that one, and he will do very good to that area, because immediately he came in, he decided to set up that seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator Ishaku, please.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, my name is Senator Ishaku Abo, representing Adamawa North. Mr. President, I would like to say with all sense of humility that our budgeting processes in this country have been very, very scandalous, to say the least, because we have been running a budget that obviously has no direction, not need-based, not assessment-based. Somebody from your village working in a ministry in Abuja will sit down in his office and do a budget that will be implemented in my village without asking the people of my village what do they want. But you sit in your office in Abuja from the Niger Delta and do budget for somebody in the Northeast in Adamawa State. I think that is irresponsible, to say the least. Mr. President, I would like to touch on 2 things. I have always believed in bottom to top approach in governance. And there's no way we can reflect that than in the allocation of our resources toward development. I have always believed that we are practicing a representative democracy, a representative government, meaning that I have 57 wards where I came from, and the people that elected me, they expected me to attract development to those wards. And I want to tell you today, sir, most of us here, most of about 9,000 wards in Nigeria, has no face of government. And we are talking about alleviating poverty. Mr. President, I want actually suggest a more radical approach toward budgeting. Each ward should have a project. We can achieve it, no matter how little, in any ministry. 2, we are talking about creating employment. Mr. President, how can you create employment without actually talking about industrializing the country? How do you talk about industrializing the country when you don't have power supply? So we must begin to get our priorities right. We are talking about defeating Boko Haram. And today, of course, this is a chamber. We have been talking about insecurity in this country. When our Air Force cannot even get a common spare part to put in a broken down helicopter, it takes them 14 months to order a spare part to put in a helicopter to fight Boko Haram. Why can't we think about actually building our own helicopter? We can do it, Mr. President. Nigerians are one of the best in this country. Mr. President, I am talking about putting money into research. I am talking about allocating money to our universities for research. I am talking about properly funding our research institutions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I'll put this to a vote, but before I do that, let me just make a little comment here. First, I'd like to thank Senator Stella Odua for this very, very crucial, very, very important motion. It's clear that it has provoked a lot of reactions and contributions from our colleagues. Let me also just add here that just listening to everyone is very, very clear that we are not bereft of ideas. Absolutely not. We are not. I also disagree with those who say we lack resources. The resources are there. We may not have all of the resources that we need or that we want, but at least we have resources. I agree with those who say it has to do with lack of political will. And that's what it comes down to. With those comments, let me go ahead and put this to a vote. What are the recommendations? The first recommendation, it's... let me read it first for you amend. Okay, recommendation 1. Let me read before you have to amend something. I don't want you to amend it yet until I read it. Recommendation 1. Mandate the Senate Committee on Appropriations, the National Planning and Finance to conduct a thorough review of Nigeria's budgetary practices as well as national planning processes with a view to creating a more synergized and collaborative system that is both effective and efficient. Amendment, go ahead.
Mr. President, I would like to amend. I've discussed with the sponsor of this very, very important and vital motion. This motion is very central, to the entire development agenda, that this country will be derived. It's a very important document because, some of us going backwards, we have seen what had happened before, when planning was jettisoned. And when there is no connection, really. with the vision of the country and allocation of resources. That disconnect. Up to now, we have not been able to really put our acts together. So, Mr. President, I have discussed it with the sponsor of this motion, and I think for this Senate to do justice to the issues that are being canvassed in this motion, I think it is very, very important for us, like we did in several other key sectoral areas. We did that on power, we did that on solid minerals, we also did that on agriculture. Now, this planning process is very, very central. So I am amending the prayer here for this Senate to organize a round table.
Are you amending prayer 1 or?
Prayers, Mr. President, will be subsumed under this one prayer, so that this Senate should organize a round table led by its committees on finance, national planning, and appropriation, so that all stakeholders in the national planning and budgeting process will be invited, so that we can come up with a very robust recommendation to the Senate on the way in which we can be able to establish a forward-looking and well-structured national planning and budgeting processes that will be discussed with the executive arm of government, so that a system can be put in place for the future development of this country. So what I'm suggesting is that the Senate, with the leadership of its committees on finance, appropriation, and national planning, should organize a round-table discussion with all the agencies involved in this process, with a view to coming up with a robust national planning and budgeting process that will guide the future development of this country. I so amend. Mr. President.
Mr. Konda. Senator Barrow.
Senator,
So before seconding? Okay. Senator Odwa, please.
I want to raise an observation. My observation is on the sequence of the committees. I think because we're talking about planning, if there is a committee to lead the
I think that would be a call of the bench. I will make that call.
I second as proposed by the
Okay, those in favor of the prayer as amended say aye. And those against say no. The ayes have it. The Committee on National Planning will lead. Thank you very much. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, in view of a lot of commitments that many senators have and several meetings and committee assignments, I would like to move that the Senate step down all other items on our legislative agenda for the day to another legislative day. I so move.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I so second.
Those in favor of that motion say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, having come to the conclusion of our agenda for today's session, I rise to move the motion for the Senate to adjourn until the 25th, Tuesday 25th February 2020. At 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock prompt. I so move.
Minority Leader, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I so second.
Those in favor of the motion that the Senate stands adjourned until on the Tuesday, the 25th day of February 2020 at 10 a.m. prompt, say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. The Senate is adjourned to Tuesday, the 25th day of February 2020 at 10 a.m. prompt.